My name is Ipsit Vahia. I'm the medical director of the Institute for Technology and Psychiatry and the interim chief of geropsychiatry at McLean Hospital. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Lisa Lehmann. Dr. Lehmann is a primary care physician and bioethicist. She's currently an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and associate professor of health policy and management at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Prior to her current role from 2020 to 2023, Dr. Lehmann was the director of bioethics at Google, where she established the bioethics program to address ethical issues in AI, technology, and society. She chaired the Google Health Ethics Committee and worked with engineers and researchers to embed ethics into products, policy, and organizational decisions across Google, a profile that we might expect was no small thing. It's a great honor to have her deliver the first of our keynotes at TIPS 2023. And Dr. Lehmann, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ipsit. Really appreciate that introduction. And just a deep gratitude to the organizers of this conference for having the foresight to include something on ethics in this conference. I think there's been an explosion of AI. ChatGPT just had its first-year anniversary yesterday. And I think that the world has now, even though there's been many, AI has been in development for decades. It's really, I think, with the advent and the open sourcing of ChatGPT that the world has become aware of AI and the tremendous potential that AI has in all sectors of society, including healthcare. And so I really appreciate the invitation to participate in this conference and to be able to share with you some thoughts on the idea of algorithmic justice, and in particular, the responsible use of AI in psychiatry. So just some disclosures. I was a Google employee for a couple of years. I've been on the Harvard faculty and on the faculty at Brigham and Women's Hospital for about 25 years and took a brief break for Google. And so I do have some Google stock, as well as I'm a consultant for a medical device startup called MediSensor. So what I hope to do today is, first of all, explain some of the opportunities for AI in healthcare in general and in psychiatry in particular. And I want to then focus on the ethical concerns that AI raises. And identify some of the principles of trustworthy AI. There's been an explosion of frameworks from many organizations, both regulatory organizations as well as international organizations. And I think that these are very helpful for giving us some perspective on the ethical use of AI in healthcare. And then I want to share a roadmap for how we can ethically integrate AI into healthcare and suggest also some opportunities and some open questions that exist that may help us accelerate the responsible adoption of AI in healthcare. One of the things that's really interesting about healthcare that many of you may be aware of is that it takes a long time for things to be translated from the bench to the bedside, right? For us to adopt new treatments and new technologies. And it should be no surprise to us that that is true with AI also. That healthcare, amongst many different sectors in society, is actually lagging in its adoption of AI. And there are some good reasons for that, right? Because a little bit of friction and a little bit of pause and concern to ensure that we get it right and that it's safe is going to be essential given the high-risk nature and high stakes of healthcare. So let's just begin. I want to level set. And I know that this is being live streamed and there's some people online. I'm assuming that there's some way for people to ask questions online and hope to make some time at the end for questions. But if there's anything that's not clear, people should feel free to raise their hands and ask questions. So what exactly is artificial intelligence or AI? And this is the idea of intelligence that's demonstrated by machines, or that in particular that machines have human cognition or signs of human cognition. And what we mean by that is this idea of learning, but not just learning, right? But also problem solving, reasoning, the ability to think. And we've had the internet for decades now, and we have rapid access to information, but I think it's important to distinguish the idea of just information from actual human cognition and that ability to reason within a particular area. And then just from a dictionary perspective, the definition of AI is the theory and development of computer systems that can perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. And some of the categories there that we might think about is visual perception, speech recognition, decision making, and language translation. And those are all using machine intelligence or machines to translate things like humans do. And AI's been around for a very long time, and it is all around us, even before ChatGPT, right? So this was a digital art competition that won the Colorado State Fair a couple years ago. And this was created, this picture, which is really beautiful, it was created, this is Jason Allen's picture of Theater d'Opera, and it was created using Midjourney, an AI algorithm that allows you to prompt the algorithm with certain images and text or speech to create an image, and you can tweak it. And there's been, as you likely know, there's been a lot of controversy. Is this art? Is it not art? Is AI just another tool like a paintbrush, right? If you go back centuries before the paintbrush was invented, right, some people may have said, well, using the paintbrush is not the same as painting without the paintbrush. And so I think that there's some very interesting questions in terms of the metaphors and the analogies and how we think about new technology in the context of that history and whether something is art or is not art. This is an example of just using our phones to translate, and many of us have benefited in many ways from the ability to translate text into multiple languages or speech into new languages, and that's using AI. The other example here that I think was really groundbreaking, and this speaks not just to natural language processing, but to this idea of human cognition and learning, which is one of the significant advances in AI, was the game AlphaGo that many of you may be aware of, which is a game that is based on certain rules. And what was astounding here is people predicted that it would take AlphaGo many years to be able to, for the computer to beat the highest level human player. And what you see here is that at the 3-hour mark, AlphaGo actually just plays like a beginner. So it's learning the rules, and it's not great. But over time, if you look at what AlphaGo does at 19 hours, where it really begins to understand strategy, and it can capture and store things, and then at 70 hours, it actually is superior, it gets even better. And so what you see here is an example of a computer learning and improving over time. And eventually, it was able to beat the highest playing human back in 2016. This is a cartoon from the New Yorker, I think a couple months ago, actually, in where you can see robots enslaving humans, and the caption reads here, "To think that this all began with letting autocomplete finish our sentences," right? When you're using your email and autocomplete is finishing it, or also like on LinkedIn now, it finishes it, right? That's all AI working based with natural language processing and predicting what's the most likely next word given what you've already typed. And this is a depiction, I think, of kind of one extreme of AI. This is the doomsday extreme, right? The existential threat of AI with robots taking over the world, enslaving humans, and the great controversy that I think exists in our society over whether artificial general intelligence is, that we're moving towards is a good thing or a bad thing for society. I think my perspective on this as an AI ethicist is that, and I think that this is something that we've encountered in many other spheres in healthcare also, is that technology continues to advance, and it's up to us as humans to decide how we use it, whether we use it for good, for bad, whether it's going to be used in good ways for society or not. And so at the end of the day, it's humans that are going to be controlling the robots. And the challenge is, how can we ensure that we have good safeguards and guardrails, and how can we ensure that we can anticipate those risks of using AI in whatever sector we're talking about, but especially in the high stakes sectors like healthcare, to ensure that we can mitigate those risks. So I think that, as I try and show you here, is that I think there's a lot of wonderful potential for AI in healthcare, and at the same time, we need to be cautious and careful to ensure that we're doing this ethically and responsibly. So just a show of hands, how many people have used ChatGPT for de-identified clinical questions? Okay, so I'm seeing a few hands, but I actually would have thought it would have been more. I mean, maybe 10 people raised their hands just now, and some people kind of sheepishly, like not, you know, and I know that so I know that there are kind of rules about using ChatGPT clinically, and I intentionally said for de-identified clinical questions, because I don't think there's anything from an MGB perspective prohibiting your use of ChatGPT or any large language model for de-identified clinical questions, right? If the concern with using it for, there are many concerns with using it clinically, but one big concern is HIPAA and inserting patient identifiable information into it that it then may store and use and may come out in other settings. So let me maybe change the question. How many people have used ChatGPT in their personal lives? Okay, so almost everybody. Interesting. Okay, wonderful. And there's a session later today, which I was so thrilled to see on the program, about large language models. So I'm not going to spend most of my time today really talking about the ethics of large language models and ChatGPT. But I will mention, you know, as I said earlier, yesterday was the one-year anniversary of ChatGPT, and there's tremendous potential, I think, for ChatGPT within psychiatry and within healthcare that we need to be thinking about, and also a lot of risks. The main concern with ChatGPT, in addition to privacy issues, has to do with hallucinations and the potential. I know in psychiatry we're used to that term. It doesn't strike me as the best term to capture the issue. I think it's basically erroneous information that GPT is coming up, that generative AI is producing, in that it can lie with confidence. And so it seems as if it's giving us an answer that we would think was correct. But it makes stuff up. It will make up references, and as a result of that, when we're talking about using it in the context of healthcare, there's real potential for harm to our patients, right? If ChatGPT gives us, if we insert into ChatGPT a clinical picture, and we ask it to give us a differential diagnosis, or if we insert a constellation of symptoms, and we ask it for treatment recommendations, right? Some of that may be a good starting point, but some of it may be wrong. And there's been some studies that have looked at this, and there is the potential for harm there that we need to be very cautious about. So there's going to be a lot more on that, and I'm going to try and talk really a little bit at a higher level about the use of AI in healthcare. So why should we use AI in psychiatry? So AI is particularly helpful in situations where we have lots of data to look through, and where we have limited expertise, and where there's the opportunity to automate certain tasks, And also, I think that in the context of healthcare, there are things that we can act on it. There's predictions that AI can make that are actionable, and that's particularly why it's helpful. So I think psychiatry and healthcare in general is, some of this can be extrapolated to other areas of healthcare, not just psychiatry. But we do a lot of screening where we're collecting data, and we have a lot of imaging in healthcare. AI, image-based machine learning is particularly advanced, and I think we've seen that in the use of AI, particularly in radiology. If you look at the FDA-approved devices, the FDA has a concept of software as a medical device, and there's about 600 approved AI algorithms. Many of those are in the field of radiology and cardiology, and in part of the reason has to do with the use of imaging and the advanced reliability that we have with regard to using AI when it comes to image-based machine learning. But AI is also great when we have for repetitive tasks. So some examples that are already in use, that are being evaluated currently, has to do with AI-generated clinical notes, where you have ambient AI, and Microsoft has developed this technology when it purchased a company called Nuance that's now part of Microsoft, and some of the MGB clinics may be testing this, in fact, where you have in the background an ambient scribe who's listening in on the conversation and generating a note for you, so as a clinician. So we know there's a huge epidemic of burnout in healthcare. Part of the many reasons for that burnout, one of which has to do with the electronic health record, and which you might have thought was a technology that was going to help us as clinicians, but it was really created for billing purposes. And as a result, we spend all day seeing our patients, and then we have to go back and deal with our notes, which is a burden. Sometimes typing during our clinical exams takes us away from our patients, and especially in psychiatry, where that physician-patient relationship is so central and so sacred, right? The interference of the computer poses a real challenge. So this idea of AI working in the background to generate a note is very appealing from a clinical perspective, and I would say from a human perspective, right? It may actually be beneficial. Now, there are many risks to this too, one of which has to do with accuracy and ensuring that clinicians don't become lazy and just assume that the automated scribe, the AI scribe, is accurate, and taking the time to actually review the note and correct it and make sure that we're doing that well. Another example here is AI-generated responses to inbox messages, right? This is another source of, I think, burnout and challenge for clinicians, right? You see patients all day, and then at the end of the day, you have to go back and respond to your inbox messages on the patient portal and all the questions that patients have. Epic is working with Microsoft and has integrated a technology to have automated responses to inbox messages. We can start with very low-risk messages for patients, and then the AI generates the response. It has to be reviewed by a clinician, and that hopefully will help clinicians both in terms of the timeliness and the burden of responding to these kinds of tasks. AI-generated prior approvals is another example. We all have to deal with insurance companies and getting them to approve certain medications or tests, and can AI ease that burden? So we have lots of data to look through. AI may sift through that data and generate things for us to help make our lives better. The other area here is where expertise is limited. We know, and actually just in the previous session that I was in, was talking about digital phenotyping and the mental health crisis that we have, especially amongst adolescents, right? But we have a crisis in mental health throughout this country in general, not only with adolescents, but with adults too, with increased loneliness amongst the elderly, and just not enough mental health providers. And that's in Western countries, let alone globally, right? So think globally here, where there's a shortage of psychiatrists and mental health clinicians. When you have situations where expertise is limited, the value of AI is tremendous because it has the ability to scale in ways that we can't scale our human abilities and capacities. So we're never going to have enough mental health providers or clinicians, even if we created more medical schools and more training programs. So given the global shortage here, there's the potential for AI to step in, and I'll share with you some apps that have been developed, and I know there's going to be more conversation at the conference later today on this. And the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, has approved the use of many apps and cognitive behavioral therapy as a first-line treatment for conditions, for mental health conditions, for patients because of this challenge of scaling and the limited expertise. And then we talked a little bit about predictions and AI-guided treatment decision-makings. There was some conversation in the earlier session about predicting suicide, and I think that this is a particularly interesting one for psychiatry because it's something that is so high stakes, right? It's so important that we get this right, and it raises many interesting ethical questions related to privacy and the security, and grateful to our colleague from Apple who stood up and said how everything is on device. So the worries that people have here about privacy that may be inhibiting their use of this technology that may be, in fact, life-saving, we need to alleviate that. I will say the same for Google. Even location history now for Google is on device. And we have improved technological methods, such as the concept of differential privacy, that really should help alleviate many of the concerns that we have from a clinical community perspective about sharing data and the use of this data to improve patients' outcomes. The other thing that I've learned, and I know that I was told that there are people, and it's so important in the development of AI to have the patient's voice and the community representation and the diversity of stakeholders present in these conversations. But from my experience in talking to patients who are so eager to have both better understanding of their illnesses and diagnosis of rare diseases in particular, they're very willing to make those trade-offs in terms of privacy for a diagnosis and for improved patient outcomes. So I think that we need to be putting some of the concerns about, first of all, understand that data is being aggregated and that we're using secure environments and advanced technological abilities to protect people's privacy, and we need to be thinking here about the potential advantages to patients of using this data and using the technology to improve outcomes. Okay, so here are just some examples of some apps. The well-being apps here listed are all approved by the by the NHS, the National Health Service in Europe, in the UK. And you can see, there's recommendations here for using these as first-line treatment. The NHS also approved this digital therapeutic called Sleepio as a cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia instead of medication, right? So the idea here is that this app, this AI-driven app, is actually better than medication and is a first-line sort of digital therapeutic that we should be offering to our patients. In the bottom left-hand here, you'll see 10 best mental health and therapy apps of 2023 listed. And then I also want to just point out this medical device that was developed in Japan called Paro, the robo-seal, which is being used. It looks like a stuffed animal. This is a picture of it down here. It looks like a stuffed animal, but it's being used to help the elderly with loneliness. It has facial recognition and emotional recognition built into it. And it's being used with dementia patients. And many people may say, well, is this ethical? Is this a good thing to be doing? I'll go back to the question here of our pandemic of loneliness, right, in the world, and the few treatments that we have available for dementia patients. And we need to be evaluating these things in robust clinical trials, and at the same time, we shouldn't just be dismissing them because they seem somewhat science fiction-like. So what are some opportunities for AI in psychiatry? I think that we can realize here that there's the potential for it to improve health outcomes for all patients. And I focus on all patients here because we also have tremendous challenges in healthcare with disparities in healthcare, right? We know that, that we don't do as well in certain marginalized or vulnerable populations, and there are many reasons for that, right? Part of it has to do with the data. Part of it has to do with our unconscious biases or implicit biases. Some of it may have to do with conscious biases, actually. But I think that, and AI actually has the potential to amplify those biases, and those biases will persist if we are not aware of them and try and address them intentionally through better data. But at the same time, it does have the potential to reduce those disparities if we get it right. So I think AI can augment clinicians with insights for personalized diagnosis and treatment, and we can move here from what's been our norm now of population health-based approach to disorders and diagnosis and treatment to a much more individual-based, personalized, or precision medicine based approach that AI is going to help us with. The other advantage of AI here, and we're already beginning to see this with large language models and the most advanced versions of GPT, is that there's rapid integration of multimodal data. And what I mean by that is not just notes, structured data from our electronic health records, but you can now feed GPT images. It doesn't work so well, I'll say at this point, but it will get better as it's trained on more healthcare data. You can put into it not only eventually, or into a large language model, AI can handle the integration of electronic health record data, genomic data, imaging data, social determinants of health, right? We know that social determinants of health, or the social drivers of health, actually account for about 60% of patients' health outcomes, right? So much more than what we can do in terms of diagnosing clinical disorders such as depression or anxiety or hypertension or diabetes, right? We can treat all of those things, but if patients don't have stable housing, if they don't have access to resources to pay for their medications, right? All of those social drivers are going to influence health outcomes. And we can put information into large language models as well as the information from wearable devices, and not just wearable devices, but as we saw in the last session that I was in, the digital phenotyping and the information actually from the use of our smartphones and our keyboards, right? I love that idea of it's not just the fitness tracker data, the wearable tracking data, but this idea of creating a fitness tracker for our brain to integrate all of that data to help improve patients' outcomes. AI can also improve patients' access to healthcare and research here, and I think this is a tremendous opportunity of generative AI and things like ChatGPT, which are now open sourced, that can empower our patients because we're democratizing knowledge and access to information. And I would suggest to you that information is actually a driver and determinant of health. So the more we empower our patients with access to information, the better health outcomes they're going to have. So if our patients can go into a large language model like ChatGPT and get some information about their illness, about their symptoms, about their medications and the side effects of those medications, about how those medications may interact with other medications that they're taking, just think about how empowering that can be. Now, there's the worry there that maybe some of that may not be accurate, so we always need to have that caution in the back of our minds and be careful. And at the same time, this technology is here to stay. We need to work with our colleagues to continuously improve it from a healthcare perspective, to make sure that it's trained on good clinical data. When I was at Google and we were training one of the Google large language models, my initial reaction to seeing this was, why don't you feed it all of UpToDate, right? Why don't you feed it all of the Mix app, right? And that wasn't happening at that point. But it will over time, right? All of PubMed, all of the most up-to-date research articles that are published in the journals that we all read will eventually be in the large language models, so that hopefully those advances in science can be accessed more, clinicians can become more aware of it, and it can help our patients, right? Because at the end of the day, this is all about our patients. I think that AI does have the potential to reduce disparities and drive health equity if we are conscious in thinking about equity and ethics from the start in terms of how we build our models and how we evaluate our AI systems. It can also improve the efficiency and reduce the cost of healthcare. We've talked a little bit about some of the ways in which ambient scribes or automated generated notes and things like that can increase the efficiency. It can reduce the administrative burden on healthcare providers. I think it's also a tool for medical education, right? And it'll be really interesting to see how this is being used by medical students and by residents to reinforce their learning and to help them understand different challenging concepts and questions. And then finally, I'll say here that I actually think that AI has the potential to restore the humanity of the physician-patient relationship and the joy of practicing medicine, right? The reasons why we all went into medicine to begin with. Because if we can get away from sitting in front of our keyboard when we're talking to our patients and when we're engaging with them, and we can be more present during our clinical encounters, I think that that's going to be more meaningful and rewarding to us as clinicians as well as to our patients. So there's a little bit of an irony there that technology actually might get us to a more human version of healthcare. Now, despite all these benefits of AI and the potential here, we've had significant challenges with implementation and a lot of very high-profile failures in the use of AI. Epic developed a sepsis model that was rolled out in many hospitals across the country, and it did not hold up on external validation, and it was very challenging. In terms of what it was predicting, it created a lot of alert fatigue and skepticism amongst clinicians. And then there's also been a lot of high-profile challenges with regard to bias in our AI algorithms that have been developed. And so the title of this talk was Algorithmic Justice and the Responsible Use of AI. And I want to talk a little bit about bias in clinical algorithms and why this matters. So when we talk about bias, what I'm referring to here is differences in how one or more subgroups are represented, perceived, or treated that results in an unfair or unjust outcome. And the sources of bias are different, right? And multiple, right? We can have bias that's systemic, that may be related to the data that we're putting in, and I would say that this is one of the biggest areas that we can easily do something about if we have more collaboration and more data sharing. But we have partial data sets, we have not enough representation in our data sets from a diversity of populations. Data can be skewed. We can have systemic bias based on our social norms and processes that go into our AI systems also. We can also have computational and statistical biases, and there can be human and cognitive biases that we put into the development and design and the implementation of our AI systems, and how these are operated and deployed in healthcare settings, and even how they're monitored. And so we need to be cognizant of all of these different ways in which that bias gets into our AI systems so that we can anticipate it, evaluate if it's happening, and go back and correct it. Because if we leave the bias there unchecked, it's going to lead to poor outcomes and amplification of the disparities in healthcare that we all are eager to overcome. So what is algorithmic justice, actually? What do I mean by that concept? And this is the idea of ensuring fairness and accountability and transparency in how we're designing and implementing our AI systems that are making automated decisions, right? It's focused on reducing that bias and ensuring that we have fairness throughout. The goal is to identify it, mitigate it, and address it, and ensure that when we're using an AI system to make a prediction, that it is accurate, reliable, and fair, that it works equally well in all populations. And there are many challenges to this, and I'll go into some of those challenges, but part of the goal here is to help developers of the AI systems and the organizations that are deploying them ensure that there's a focus on algorithmic justice when they're deploying an AI system. And what's so challenging about this, and I think what's so nice about this conference is the diversity of stakeholders that are here, because in order to do this well, in order to address algorithmic justice and achieve it, we really need conversation between the technologists, right? The data scientists, the engineers, the people who are developing the AI systems, and the clinicians, and the patients, and the ethicists, right? Everybody needs to be at the table to ensure that we're identifying the bias and that we have standards to do that, and that we're addressing it, and that we're looking in an ongoing way as we're deploying these systems in healthcare settings to ensure that we are achieving that fairness that we're seeking. So why is this important? And I want to give you a concrete example. This is was become a fairly well-known article that was published in Science in 2019 by my colleague Zaid Obermeyer, who's at University of California, Berkeley. And this was a 2019 study that was used an AI system to figure out who would benefit from an intensive care management program. In other words, which of my patients need more care management and are going to benefit from that kind of intensive resource? And what it found was that what it did actually was that it used spending, healthcare spending, and money cost, the cost of healthcare spending, as a proxy for healthcare access. So the AI algorithm actually predicted that black patients needed less intensive care management than white patients. And the reason why it predicted that black patients needed less intensive care management was because it used this proxy of healthcare spending as a proxy for the need for care management. And in reality, because black patients, despite having more chronic diseases and despite needing more intensive care management, the algorithm predicted that they needed less care management because they actually had less access to healthcare and less utilization of healthcare. So black patients actually spent less money on healthcare usage, and as a result, the algorithm suggested that they didn't need care management as much as they did. When the algorithm was actually corrected, to the appropriate, when it didn't use this proxy of healthcare spending, and it just used their chronic conditions, right? Their risk score that was based on their clinical need for care management, what it actually found was that the percentage of black patients that would have been eligible for the care management program jumped from 17% to 46%. So you can see the tremendous bias that existed in this AI system as a result of a very poor choice of a proxy that was integrated into the AI algorithm, into the AI system. And unless we are very thoughtful and have all the parties and all the stakeholders at the table engaged in the development and the deployment and the evaluation and ongoing monitoring of these systems, and unless we're thinking critically and ask ourselves, does this make sense? Does it make sense to use healthcare spending as a proxy for need, for healthcare need. And what might be the downsides of that? We're never going to uncover these biases. So it's a really important area that we need to get a handle on. So what are some of the ethical risks of deploying AI in healthcare? I talked a little bit earlier about errors or hallucinations and recommendations from generative AI or things like large language models like ChatGPT that may actually harm patients, and we need to be careful about that issue. There can be biased recommendations from AI systems that can exacerbate health disparities. It can also lead to an increased variation in the quality of care. I have many worries about differences between rural and urban healthcare settings or tertiary academic healthcare systems like Mass General Brigham or the Stanford or the Hopkins or the Duke that has tremendous access to data scientists that can build these AI systems internally, train it on their local data, and ensure that the algorithms work well in their own populations versus the community hospitals that just don't have those resources. And how are we going to ensure that AI is democratized and that those community hospitals or that those patients who are living in rural settings have the benefits of AI to improve health outcomes? AI may also have non-actionable predictions or misleading recommendations. And here I think we always need to go back to the question and ask ourselves about the usefulness of the AI. Why are we using AI in this particular circumstance, for this particular clinical condition? And does it make sense? Is there a real value here? There's also the harm here that the recommendations may be blindly followed by clinicians. This is the idea of de-skilling, that over time we're not going to have the same clinical skills, and that may ultimately harm patients. But we may also there's like an automation bias, right? We may get so used to the AI giving us the right answer 90% of the time that we stop looking, and the 10% may actually harm our patients. So there's a real risk here that we need to be cautious of. Patient privacy, as I mentioned, is a concern that we need to safeguard, and I think we have good technological methods to address this. We also need to be mindful of data shifts, or which is a mismatch of the training data and the deployment data, especially if a healthcare system or you're using an AI system that was bought and not developed internally and was not trained on your local data. You should be asking questions about it. So my hope is that all of you at this conference who are working as clinicians, if your healthcare system is implementing or deploying an AI system, ask questions. And you should be knowing when AI is working in the background, right? Because we need to really know what's the data that it was trained on. This is one of the big challenges of ChatGPT, by the way, right? ChatGPT, we don't have the transparency that we'd like. We don't know what ChatGPT was trained on. What healthcare data was it trained on? It scrubs a lot of stuff from the internet, but there isn't the kind of transparency that I think we, from a clinical perspective, should be demanding. So as a result of that, we have problems with transparency with ChatGPT, we have problems with reliability with ChatGPT, and we have problems with the consistency. I'm hopeful that over time those things will change. And that we'll be building large language models and generative AI that is specific to clinical care and to healthcare and to psychiatry, and actually specific to individuals. Eventually, we'll have personalized, I think, generative AI assistants that are going to know everything about us and can help us in a very tailored way. The other thing important to realize here is that these models may actually, their performance may degrade over time, which is why there's a real need for ongoing monitoring. And there may be challenges, I think, when we think about deploying AI in healthcare to how healthcare providers can adjust to the future of work. I don't think AI, right, there's been lots of predictions about AI replacing clinicians. I don't think that's going to happen. But the way in which we practice medicine, or the way in which you practice psychiatry may indeed change, right? 10 years ago, you weren't recommending apps for patients for insomnia or cognitive behavioral therapy. That is going to become more and more common. So figuring out the ways in which we can leverage the good here, the potential for AI to benefit our patients and improve their outcomes, and potentially at the same time improve our burnout as clinicians and the joy that we can receive in healthcare, there's tremendous potential, but also an opportunity to recognize here that it's going to be different in the future. And some people may have challenges in adjusting to that. The other thing that I'll point out here is that there are government regulations that currently exist and that are continually evolving, right? This is a rapidly evolving space of software as a medical device. Okay, I'm realizing, what time, how much time? Okay, so I'm gonna skip through some of this and just talk from, I'm actually, people will hopefully get the slides. I can share the slides. But I want to just share like a roadmap here for really how we can get to responsible AI and algorithmic justice. And I think one of the critical things here is, first of all, organizational governance and oversight, right? We need to be putting those things into place to begin with. That needs to happen. We need to be thinking about governance of our model development and the deployment of models and retrospective evaluation. These have to be evaluated prospectively, initially in a silent way, and then in the real world with good clinical trials. Understanding the clinical workflow and focusing on end-user adoption, you guys as clinicians, and how you're interacting with the AI is so critical in order for this to happen. The reason why we have a problem with translation in healthcare with new technologies is because people don't think about the clinical workflow and how healthcare providers are going to interact with it or not interact with it. And then it's really important to think about how we're going to monitor these things over time in some kind of system for auditing. So I think just as a way of summary here, I've tried to show to you that AI, I think, has tremendous potential to augment clinicians and improve patients' outcomes. At the same time, it raises some unique ethical and equity concerns that I think we can get a handle on and address if we put into place the proper governance structures and a thoughtful approach to this. We can achieve algorithmic justice and the responsible integration of AI through these governance structures by adopting a systematic roadmap and by increased collaboration between industry and clinicians, because I think we need to realize that our industry partners have the technology here and the ability to rapidly advance in this space. And I think we also have some challenges with data sharing, and that ultimately is going to ensure more representation and less bias in our clinical algorithms if we can get to a point where we have more data sharing and collaboration. So I'll stop here and be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lehmann. I think our schedule has us moving straight into our next set of sessions, so we probably won't have time for questions at the moment. That being said, there's so much to chew on in this topic, and I think the concept of algorithmic justice is a new one, an emerging one. I'm hoping we can find you after the next session during the lunch break to further the discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will break out into our second round of symposia next. Thank you.